How are you doing? Nice.
I'm great. I'm fine. So
How's
far,
how's
so
the
good.
kid?
Oh, well, he's adorable. I just
We've been
enjoy.
we've been following.
Ah, have you? Wow, that's
Yep.
great. I'd like to talk about Delta first, because I know that you've passed all three modules, all three Delta modules with distinction. What's your secret?
Um, well, I mean, there are probably two ways to approach this question. Like the first one that I think is kind of relevant is that when I started doing my module 2 back in 2016, I didn't exactly start it at the step in your career that is recommended by Cambridge, which is like I think about 2 years experience.
Post-CELTA.
Post CELTA, but it is also assumed that for a lot of people that be 2 years of experience total as well. Yeah, for me, it wasn't like that at all. I think I started my module 2 when I had like I think 7 years of teaching experience under my belt, and before that it was 5 years at university as well.
Right.
And before that, I mean, I also studied English as a foreign language, so I kind of had to grapple with like phonemic script and like peculiarities of grammar of the English language way before that. So when I was maybe 12 years old, and
Wait a second. You started learning English when you were 12?
on my own, I started learning when I was 6, when I first got my first computer game that was entirely in English. So I had to kind of like get the dictionary for, I think was one of Space Quest games. I was at a Sierra Adventure series of games. And the problem with those, that unlike the game consoles at the time, there's a lot of language in those. So you actually had to understand what was going on. So I kind of like took the dictionary and went through all the words that I didn't know. I didn't even know what English was, so it's kind of happened mostly on its own. So I think that allowed me to, when I actually started my Delta course in 2016, that allowed me to focus more on things that I kind of missed along the way and identify my gaps kind of in a much easier fashion than I think it is for a lot of teachers, because, there is a lot of time pressure involved with the Delta course. So it kind of helped that a lot of the things that might be difficult for teachers attempting it, I already had under my belt because of kind of playing it safe and really, really taking my time before I even attempted it in the first place. So I think that's one reason. I would say the other reason is probably because I tried to find a way to be, so I'm really bad at time management. I'm really bad at organizing my time and making sure that I do things in the way they should be done exactly at the kind of allocated time slot. So it was quite hard for me
To be perfect.
No, no,
But you were in the
but
end.
what I was trying to say is that it was quite hard for me to organize my time. But then the kind of the way around it that I found is to be like quite interested in what it was I was required to do. So try to find things that I'm really passionate about. I'm really feeling that I kind of can benefit from. And then just, time disappears and I could spend like 6 hours preparing an LSA for module 2 or even up to 12 hours working on my module 3 as well.
Well, but that can have a negative effect on the teaching itself. When you are lost in time because of the passion you have, you may just lose the hand of the timing that is essential for teachers, especially when they do module 2.
Yeah, here I'm mostly talking about the time it takes to actually come to grips with what it is that you need to do in the course, preparation time, working on exam practice before module 1, and then of course working on your module 3, which is all about making sure that you do enough in the time that you're given.
So, but you were teaching back then. How did you manage to combine these two jobs? Because preparing for Delta is just another job you have.
So it was extremely hard. I did not set out to finish my module 3 with distinction when I did it. So I did module 1 and 2. I did them intensively. So I took 2 months in summer just to do them back to back. And then module 3 I had to do on top of my full-time job. And I would not recommend it to anyone. It was extremely hard, especially people with poor like time management skills such as myself. It was really, really difficult.
Hardcore. I bet you
Yeah,
choose hardcore modes when you play games. So I guess it's the
occasionally, yeah.
irony. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Delta is often described as the most inspiring teaching qualification. How far do you agree? I mean, has it really made a big difference in the way you teach, or is it just a paper that has opened, many doors for you to get employed abroad?
So I actually have no idea as to the extent that Delta helped open doors, or in a lot of institutions, both private and public, Delta doesn't actually make that much of a difference from what I found out. So I don't know. When it comes to teaching itself and when it comes to professional development and getting better at what you do, I think it was extremely helpful. But it's important here to separate kind of Delta, the course, and Delta as the set of assessment tools that is designed for teachers. Because one is put out by Cambridge, and it's just assessment. It's just like designed to see exactly where you are, in your progression as a teacher, while all the courses are then offered by centers that have certain affiliation with Cambridge, and those vary so much. So it's very hard to say if, for example, the way I experienced my Delta would be similar to the way someone else would. Personally, I found it extremely inspiring. Personally, it was an opportunity for me to really, really focus on what it is that I'm doing in the class. Right. And I really enjoyed it. But it also is a matter of if Delta is not that inspiring, then what is? And unfortunately here, we don't have that many alternatives. So you have your Trinity diploma that you could get. The problem with that is very few people were able to actually compare the two, because very few people actually took the two to meaningfully compare them. So I guess I know some people that I work with right now who took Trinity diploma, and they have some, they have some high praise for it as well. The other alternative would be doing an MA course at a university, but again, that would depend on the university, on the kind of support you get and all that. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say. The problem, I think, is mostly because it's literally, apart from Trinity Deep, so the only thing that you can do on the cheap after CELTA, and the only thing that you can actually slot in somewhere in between your regular teaching hours.
But still, Delta is more widely recognized than Trinity diploma. Am I right?
I would bet, don't quote me on this, but I would bet that if people do care about Delta enough, they would also give some credence to Trinity Dip as well.
Right. So now that you're Delta qualified, do you see your future connected to teaching students or managing teachers?
I definitely see myself teaching in the future. I will not abandon teaching students. One of the reasons, I think we'll get to that question in the future, but I'm really bad at managing. I'm really bad at organizing people, because my management job would involve much more than just, being really good in the classroom. It involves like interpersonal skills. You have to do much, much more that goes way beyond the skill set that is associated with teaching. You have to have, again, you have to set an example as being good with time management, something that I'm not that good at. So the way I see my career developing in the future is probably something to do, if I'm lucky, something to do with either instead of managing teachers, but training teachers. So perhaps training, or if that doesn't pan out, maybe materials development as well. So something that would allow me to reach a much bigger pool of students through the teachers that I might train in the future.
That would be great, I presume. By saying training teachers, do you mean becoming a CELTA tutor or something?
That's one of the avenues. Sure, yeah, that's available. Something I've been considering. Perhaps.
You mentioned that you'll never abandon teaching, which is good news for both colleagues of yours and students. What is the reason for you not giving up teaching?
Well, I think it would sound a little bit I don't know, too sugary, but I honestly do enjoy it. I enjoy being in the classroom. I enjoy actually leveraging the amount of experience that I have and helping people. Like that was one of the primary reasons that I got into this job. Like it wasn't the promise of travel. It wasn't obviously not the allure of money. So the only reason I chose it because when I started doing it, I realized, oh, I actually do enjoy and I find my job meaningful, valuable, and when I see students grateful, you know, that really gets me going.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah, it's one of the most important things, something that gives you this buzz, right? Something
Yeah,
that is
absolutely.
rewarding. Yeah, right. So now you're currently living and working in Hong Kong in the British Council. Correct me if I'm wrong. In
That
the
is
British
correct.
Council, good. So what is it like living and working in Hong Kong?
The reason I came to Hong Kong in the first place, so I started my career in Ukraine and I taught for about 7 years in Ukraine before I even considered moving anywhere else. I did move between different cities in Ukraine, but nothing, there was no teaching that I ever did, apart from my Delta Module 2, which I did in Poland. There was no teaching that I did beyond that. So after finishing my Module 2 and Module 1, I was thinking about the ways I can develop even further as a teacher. And one kind of glaring omission that I identified is I was really limited in terms of the context that I'm capable of teaching in. So back in Ukraine, I always taught my compatriots, people who share my first language. So a lot of the assumptions that I would make about what they are able to do and what they can't do, they would not necessarily hold up
Right.
in a different context for people of different cultures, for people with different L1. So it was interesting for me to see if the skill set that I acquired is even applicable in a different context, or will I have to reimagine and completely reinvent the way I teach after moving to another place?
Is it? Is the skill set you have applicable for your work?
Mostly, yeah. Mostly it was, to be honest. Yeah. Mostly people are much, so I also have very little experience traveling around the world and meeting people from different cultures. So I was happy to discover that actually people are much more similar around the world than initially assumed. So
So, so
it was great.
basically, you have to travel to the other side of the globe to find out the common truth that people are just the same, no matter what color they are, what
That's right.
nationality they are.
You'll never learn it as well unless you experience it yourself.
That's true,
I'd
right?
argue. Yeah.
So, speaking of the workplace of yours, did you find any differences in the terms of and agreement when you signed the contract from that the policy of the school that you used to work for?
No, I don't usually read contracts that attentively, to be honest. I find them
Neither
extremely
do I.
boring.
But
I just hope that everything that's listed there is always for a good reason. So
mhm.
I never paid much attention to it. What I did pay attention to was the salary that I was going to get.
Uh-huh.
And let me tell you one thing: that the salary here far exceeds what you could be earning in Ukraine. That is absolutely true, and that's another reason of why I also sought to broaden my experiences.
And you mentioned that finance was not one of the reasons you started teaching career, and still you're
It
talking about the money.
it was absolutely not the reason I started doing it, and it's absolutely not the reason why I do it from every single day. But you can't argue that it's. I think it's important in the way that we as teachers will produce better work if we are fairly compensated for it. We will have less worries about what's happening in our lives. We'll feel more secure. We will feel less stressed, and therefore we'll be able to put more energy into our lessons and meet our students' needs much better. So yeah, I think it's important. I think it's not important for me, and it's not a primary factor that drives me. but it's absolutely important. Yeah.
But that's a big motivation. Yeah, we all agree on that. Well, you mentioned that the salaries are higher in Hong Kong. Well, for obvious reasons, I guess that one of them is that the cost of living is much more expensive, is it?
Yes, it absolutely is. Well, Hong Kong is one of the most expensive cities to live in. Literally, even though I earn several times what I earned back in Ukraine, a lot of it, almost half of it sometimes, goes toward paying rent.
Right.
So that's still an issue. But even with that taken into account, I still can afford a much higher standard of living than the one I could back in Ukraine.
So most of the money is spent on accommodation. What about the food, the cost of food? Do you cook, by the way? I'm just wondering what it's like living in abroad, you know, in
Yeah.
completely
So,
different culture.
well, so I live here with my wife, who's also a teacher, and
We'll talk to her later.
yeah. And what I found out that we cook here much less than we did back in Ukraine because the culture is that of mostly eating out. There are so many restaurants and cafes of different styles and varieties and cuisines at a generally affordable price. So that, and coupled with very, very small flats and houses that people can actually afford, so they don't have the luxury of big kitchens where they can actually, cook something meaningful for a family of 4 or 5 people. So a lot of people choose to eat out pretty much on daily basis, not just dinner but lunch as well. So yeah, we've been doing quite a lot of that, but when I'm craving some of the things that I miss from back home, yeah, there's no other way but to cook it yourself.
Do you miss buckwheat?
So I never liked buckwheat to begin with. I had a very unfortunate experience back in my kindergarten where I was force-fed buckwheat. So all of the buckwheat ended up on my whoever works at the kindergarten. So on her shoes, and since then I have this immediate gag reflex when it comes to buckwheat. But there are many other things that I do miss.
Chicken Kiev?
I'm not a big fan of that, no.
Okay, so what are your
Mashed
habits?
fish, mostly fish, like the kind of fish that so I grew up in Mariupol, which is a coastal town in the south of Ukraine, and there's a lot of fish that I miss, and the way they cook it here is not the same way that I'm used to. So yeah, I think this has been the hardest.
Thanks God you were not forced into learning the language, because otherwise you would hate English in the end, just like you hate buckwheat because you were made to eat that. So yeah, thanks.
I think so. Yeah.
So my last question is, which advice could you give to those teachers who are just about to take Delta?
I think the biggest advice I can give is that of making sure that you consider very carefully. So coming back to what I was saying earlier, that we have to separate Delta as a course and Delta as a set of assessment tools, the exams and the teaching practice that you need to do in Module 2 and the assignment that you need to write in Module 3. That's like very separated from the way the preparation courses are made around the world in different training centers. So I would suggest someone considering doing the Delta, first of all, to think very carefully about how they're going to do it, whether they're going to do it intensively over the period of 2 months. And that's the way I did my module 1 and 2. And I can't recommend it more, because I found it's really, really good to leave your household chores behind, leave any responsibility that you might have, and focus only on that aspect, combining it with your responsibilities as a family member, combining it with a full-time job. I've talked to some teachers who are attempting to do the Delta like that. They found it extremely taxing. So I would definitely recommend considering the exact way people are going to approach the Delta. And I would also advise them to look into the kind of different preparation courses that are offered around the world. They're not all created equal. Some offer more support than others. Again, this is completely outside of Cambridge control. So it's very important, and that I think is what kind of makes or breaks Delta for a lot of people, and something that maybe they did not consider, where they thought that Delta is a teaching qualification course that will get them, no matter what, where they need to be before they're assessed. And I found that not to be the case. So it really matters both how you do it and where you do it.
All right, and who the tutors are, I presume.
Well, there's only so much that you can do to find out exactly who your tutors are. But again, if you know some people who did their Delta in the past, make sure to get feedback from the trainees about what the impression was of their tutors. From my point of view, I can definitely recommend the tutors that I had back in International House Wrocław, where I did my Module 1 and Module 2. I found tutors to be extremely knowledgeable and helpful in making sure that I have all. Yes, it was Alex Tilbury and Anthony Gorn.
My first question was about the Delta thing, how you managed to pass with distinction. And you mentioned 2 reasons, but you forgot about the third reason, probably because of your modesty. The third reason is just that you're just a smart guy, and so, well, it pays you off in the end, all efforts.
I don't believe that people are born gifted in some way or another. So I do genuinely believe that I had the advantage of having figured out many things that the Delta course might require of you way beforehand. So in my actual course, I could focus on the gaps themselves. But still, thank you for the compliment. All right, it was very nice to see you. Thank you.
Likewise. Bye.